Hi friends, welcome back to Brianna's Bookshelf. So today we are going to be doing the mid-year book tag. Now I know what you're thinking, but wait Brianna, isn't it August? That's like way past the middle of the year. And you would be right, but I lost a lot of time there in my moving process, and I really wanted to get to this tag and I did not quite have time to get to it. So we are disregarding all of time, all of the rules. We're just gonna do it now because why not? This is my channel, so what says goes. And I've seen a few different people do this tag, so I've just kind of picked some questions from different videos that I saw. Most of the questions I have picked from Bestie Angel Can't Read's mid-year tag video. So please go and check out her video if you have not already. So our first question here is, what has your favorite read of 2025 been? And I had a really hard time picking an answer to this because I just read across some genres that are very different. Like I feel like my main loves are fantasy and horror, and I feel like those are just so different that I decided to pick one for each. So two favorite books of this year so far. The first one would have to be Tear or Tear, I'm still not quite sure how you pronounce the title of this book, by McKeen. And this is definitely a weird girl horror book. If you are a fan of Bunny by Mona Awad, you would probably enjoy this book. I would say it takes the kind of fever dream aspects and brings it to a whole new level. So this is even more strange, even harder to follow, I would say in some ways, than Bunny is. But it's just so spectacular. It's unlike anything I've ever read. It's very stream of consciousness feeling. It feels very delusional at times. You're really bouncing around different time frames. But essentially what we're following is our main character, Frances. She is in college and she lives with a group of other girls also in college in like this off-campus housing. She's quite shy, quiet, isn't really friends with any of the people that she lives with, and she kind of starts to reflect on her life and have some sort of derealization where she's kind of getting lost in these daydreams of things that have happened to her in the past, and we're not really getting very much of her life in the present. And as this is happening to her and she feels like she's slowly kind of going crazy in some ways, one day she tries to leave the basement apartment of the house where she lives with these other girls, and she finds that the door to the basement is locked. So she's unable to leave her room, and she, bangs on the doors, calls for the other girls, but no one answers. And so we're following Frances as she's, thinking about all these different things that have happened to her, and she's trapped in this basement. And yeah, it gets quite strange, quite terrifying. There's a lot of psychological aspects to this. It does get quite spooky and is just a really interesting read. I really enjoyed McKeen's writing. And my other favorite read of 2025 so far has been City of Gods and Monsters by Kayla Edwards. I read this on my Kindle earlier this year and I loved it so much that I just had to get the physical copy because I thought this was phenomenal. So this is the first book in a fantasy romance series, and this is kind of a darker urban fantasy romance. And I had never heard of this author before. I'd heard some people talking about this series, saying it was good, and this just hooked me in right away. I was so obsessed with the characters, with the setting. So essentially we are following our female main character, Loren. She is a human who lives in this city, and there's all sorts of magical creatures in this world. So she's friends with witches, there are fae, there are werewolves, vampires, pretty much everything you can imagine in this world. And there are also these magical bounty hunters. They're kind of their own type of creature in of themselves that have these powers that allow them to bounty hunt and trap people. And in the beginning of the book, Loren ends up being tracked, and her friend gets kidnapped by one of these tracking groups, and she finds out that it was actually supposed to be her that was kidnapped, Loren herself, and she has no idea why, because she's just a human. She hasn't been involved in anything nefarious. She's just, you know, a college student, regular girl, so she has no idea why this group is out to get her. And she ends up making a very unlikely alliance with Darien Castle, who is the head of the Seven Devils Dark Slaying group, so another one of the bounty hunter groups. And yes, they have to team up. He decides to help her find out why she's being tracked, and they're just a phenomenal pairing. I love their characters so much. I love this city that's taking place in. I love the range of different magical creatures. The story is so well thought out, in my opinion. It is just so in-depth. Like, this is a very thick book, and there's 4 books out so far, and they are all very thick. So I just cannot wait to see where the story goes next. Clearly there is a lot more that will happen and a lot more to unfold. So again, this has been an absolute fave of 2025, and I feel like for a first in a series to be 5 stars for me, that is fairly rare. So I was absolutely thrilled to read this, and I would highly recommend. Now, for the flip side of that question, what is the worst book that I have read so far in 25? In my opinion, the worst book that I've read so far has been The Paleontologist by Luke Dumas, and no hate at all if you like this book. Friends can agree to disagree, of course, but unfortunately this book just really did not work for me, and I was hoping that it would be a fun time. And this is a dinosaur horror book, kind of a paleontology horror, museum horror, which I think sounds like all very interesting topics to be covered in a horror book. However, the execution was just really not there for me. We're basically following this man who has worked in museums in the past. He gets a job at a different museum, which is one that was actually in his hometown that he went to growing up. And then from there we have several different storylines that we're kind of following, or different plot points. For one, his sister was actually abducted or went missing in this museum when they were kids, and he was there and was unable to help her, and she did go missing. And then on the other side of it, there is this like kind of strange mythology surrounding a set of dinosaur bones that belongs to this museum, and the board of directors really wants to get this dinosaur put back together and set out to be in one of the displays. But there are these almost like paranormal encounters that are surrounding this particular set of dinosaur bones. So I think part of what didn't work for me is that this followed these 2 different stories, and they both didn't quite feel related to me, and I didn't really love the direction that the actual dinosaur horror aspects went in. It wasn't very scary or interesting to me. And yeah, I think that this could have been good, but it just didn't quite execute well for me. The next prompt is, what is the best sequel you've read so far in 2025? And I'm going with The Ashes of the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. This is the sequel to The Serpent and Wings of Night. So this is the first duology in the Crowns of Nyaxia series by Carissa Broadbent. So if you're unfamiliar with this series, it is following this kind of vampire world where there are different sects of vampires with different powers and different histories that are all kind of vying for the throne. And in the first book in this duology, we're following Oriya, who is the human adopted daughter of the Nightborn vampire king. And we kind of follow her desire to be stronger and to be more invincible in this vampire society, as she is currently so vulnerable in it as a human. And so she ends up entering this contest in which the sole survivor of the contest is able to have basically any wish granted by their goddess Nyaxia. And so in the first book, she enters this competition and she ends up meeting another vampire, Rain, and they kind of have to team up to get through this contest together. We're picking up where that first story left off in the sequel, and I absolutely loved it. I gave both books 5 stars. I really just love Araya and Rain and their story, and just them as characters. They brought me so much joy to read about. So I was super duper happy to have a very satisfying conclusion in their love story. Then the worst sequel that I've read so far in 2025 would have to be The Hemlock Queen by Hannah F. Whitten. I just read this recently. I think this was in my most recent wrap up. The first book in the series, I believe, is called The Foxglove King, I want to say. I don't entirely remember. I apologize. I read these on my Kindle. I don't have the physical copy here with me. But I do know that the first book really had caught my attention. I enjoyed it a lot. I think I gave it maybe 4 stars. It was a very unique, I thought, start to a fantasy romance trilogy. And it had this kind of interesting magic system surrounding death and poisons. And we were in this kind of following this love triangle situation. So I thought it was quite captivating first book to series. However, with The Hemlock Queen, things just really took a turn for the worse, unfortunately. I could not really get back into the story. I was very bored. We didn't learn as much about the magic in the second book, so that didn't feel as relevant. And the love triangle was abysmal at this point. There was no tension. I was not rooting for any of the love interests. And yeah, I will not be continuing this series. This was a bad time for me, unfortunately, I have to say. But again, no hate if you enjoyed this book. I hope that someone did. I really wanted to like it. Unfortunately, it was just not for me. Then for a new release of 2025 that I haven't read yet that I would like to, I'm gonna have to go with Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I absolutely love her books, of course, as many of us here on BookTube do. I think that she just has an incredible way of writing her characters and making you care so deeply about them and so deeply about their own interests. So pretty much all I know about Atmosphere is that it follows a female astronaut, and that's truly all I need to know about it. I just know that it would probably be a 5-star read for me, just knowing how Taylor Jenkins Reid writes her characters and how she makes you care so deeply about different topics. Obviously, I think an astronaut is quite an interesting subject of a book to start with, and so I think that Taylor can only make it more interesting and extremely captivating with the way that she writes. So I definitely would like to get to that one soon. However, I probably will be waiting until I can either get a copy from the library or pick up the paperback, because I don't really feel the need to own the hardcover of that. In general, I feel like these days I'm just kind of trending more towards paperbacks. So I'll probably wait a little bit, but I definitely want to read that. Then our next prompt is a new release for the second half of 2025 that I'm highly anticipating. And for this one, I'm gonna have to go with We Love You Bunny by Mona Awad. I mean, how could I not? This is gonna be Mona Awad's newest work, and I believe this is, she's kind of described it as a prequel and a sequel all in one to Bunny, which you can see has a very prominent place here on my bookshelf, so you can already tell how much I love that book. And I just love Mona Awad's writing in general. She has to be one of my very favorite authors. So I really cannot wait to see what she does with kind of an extension of the Bunny story. I honestly don't know too much about the book. I really have not looked into the description because I would rather go in blindly. I think that's what's best for Mona's books. She has this way of writing that makes you feel like you're in this fever dream and you never quite know what's going on, but it just really works. And so I think that I would rather know as little as possible about We Love You Bunny, but I know that I'm absolutely going to be picking it up when it comes out. I cannot wait. Okay, the next prompt is Biggest Surprise of 2025. And I'm going to have to go with The Right Move by Liz Tomford. So this was a big surprise to me because although I had heard lots of good things about it, I really did not expect to enjoy it that much myself. I realistically thought I was probably going to give it 3 stars, and that is because For one, it's contemporary romance, which I tend to never get that into. Two, it's a sports romance, and I had never read a sports romance before. And three, the male main character is like kind of, I think he's like a billionaire or multi-millionaire, and I've never been interested in the kind of billionaire romance stories. And yet I absolutely loved this book and gave it 5 stars, and I think it is my new favorite contemporary romance book of all time. Also, The Right Move is the second book, technically, in a series of interconnected standalones. I did not read the first book. I just went straight into The Right Move because I'd heard so many good things about that specifically. And it is a basketball romance. So we're following the lead basketball player in the Chicago NBA team. Of course, this is a fictional character, but someone who's supposed to be extremely famous and successful in the sport of basketball. And then our female main character is his sister's best friend, and she loses her apartment and breaks up with her fiance and needs somewhere to live. And yeah, they end up living together. It's like forced proximity. There ends up being fake dating involved. And this is also, I would say, a bit of grumpy sunshine. She is super happy, carefree, very girly, and then he is very closed off, reserved, and has a lot of trust issues. And they just have such a beautiful love story that really brought me so much joy. He really loves her in such a quiet and kind way, where he will like pay attention to the little things, and he starts to prepare all vegetarian food because that's what she eats. And he even learns sign language in order to be able to communicate with her father. So it's just such a heartwarming love story, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Even if you're normally not a romance reader, it won me over, and I think it'll win you over too. All right, next prompt is favorite new author, and I'm interpreting this as debut or an author that's new to me. And I'm going to be picking Carissa Broadbent. Hear me out, I did read my first Carissa Broadbent book last year, but we're just gonna ignore that and pretend she's new for me this year because I've read a ton of her books this year. So I read the one I showed previously, Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. I read her 2 novellas that also are part of that series, and I read the first book in the War of Lost Hearts trilogy as well. And she is just an amazing fantasy romance author, in my opinion. She really develops her worlds and her characters so well, and makes you care about the plot so deeply, which I think is super important now as fantasy romance is more popular than ever. I find myself reading a lot of books where the romance really takes precedent and the plot feels very underdeveloped, but that is definitely not the case with Carissa Broadbent's books. I think that the plot and the romance tend to hold equal importance, and her worlds feel so developed, which I really appreciate. So if you haven't checked out her books yet, I would definitely recommend her. Next up, we have a book that made you cry. And honestly, you guys, I don't cry very often when I read. I could probably like count on one hand the amount of books that I have read from my shelves back here that have made me cry. I really do not cry from books